Hi, I'm Katie, and this is the Free Art and Design School podcast, web series, whatever. I have yet another amazing guest here today. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lisa Armstrong. I am a designer, educator, musician, whatever.
You do everything.
All the things. All the things. Yeah, we do everything. So do you.
Uh,
Um,
maybe a little bit less than you do. I was wondering how you sort of got into being a designer, and whether your sort of musical interests and artistic interests came first, or sort of what your journey has been.
yeah, I was always into drawing as a kid. I think drawing was my entry point. Like I could draw a really realistic eye. And yeah, I remember we had this framed Minnie Mouse drawing that my uncle had done, my Uncle Joe. And he was a graphic designer
Mm,
at State Farm down in central Illinois for like an insurance company, not super glamorous, but like he was doing it. He studied art at the Art Institute in Kansas, which oddly enough is where Walt Disney went.
oh my
Uh,
God,
so there's a lot of like, yeah,
connections.
um, yes. So when it came time to like go to college and figure out what you're doing, it's like, well, I like to draw a lot. How do I get like paid to make art? And I got into painting and stuff. My grandma she was a nurse, but she had like a little art studio and she always had paintings up there and like weird kind of creepy Halloween tchotchkes.
Oh my
But it
God.
seemed like, oh, I like this. Um, but yeah, and then I stayed around Chicago, and went to DePaul University, and they didn't actually have a graphic design program. They had something called art and design when I started. But then my junior year, they created a new concentration or new program in graphic design, but it was in a different college within the university. So I went from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences over to the College of Computing and Digital Media. So it was a really different experience over there where I learned how to code and I learned how to animate like frame by frame. And, um, you know, up to that point, it had been more like art history, English, that kind of thing. So yeah, that was kind of the way in,
Yeah.
I guess.
So you had like a pretty multidisciplinary approach to art and design, it sounds like.
Yes, very much that.
Would you recommend that? Do you think that's kind of like one of the better practices is having a kind of Renaissance man approach to being a designer?
It works for me, but I don't know that that's like everyone's way of working. I think I like to have a lot of projects going on at the same time and like different kinds of projects. Um, so I've found it was useful just in being able to kind of like take whatever was thrown at me or, you know, like, sure, I can do that and kind of like figure it out as I'm going along. That's been kind of like my my MO in the beginning at least. Yeah, just to kind of like figure it out and stay open to all the different possibilities. And I guess it also came from my dad worked in radio
Oh, cool.
for like 40 years or something. So that whole industry like totally changed. And so I just kind of like always knew whatever I was going to be doing could totally be different in the future. And so to like kind of be open to that and um yeah, just not kind of like get stuck doing things one particular way, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense with the work that you've made and the classes that you've taught. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about sort of how you keep that openness? Is it just that you're naturally really curious about a lot of different things, or do you kind of have to push yourself to like try different things and experiment?
I think I go through phases of like getting stuck and then I have to pull myself out. And having, I guess, creative friends and people around you is a good way to kind of stay open and I don't know, stay inspired too. And yeah, it's hard. It's not like I guess it's not easy to do that. And some of it is like teaching classes too forces me to like, keep up with some skills or like learn a new kind of software and just be like, okay, I was doing this in Adobe XD. We're going to be doing it in Figma now, and it might be something different next year, and to like not get too attached to like all the course materials I prepared last year that I can't use anymore and like um yeah, so I don't know, I think there's like external factors that sort of force me to be open to um yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess design more than most fields has changed a lot in the past 5, 10 years. Like oil painting, maybe we have new synthetic pigments, but like graphic design, literally, there's new software every year. There's new updates that like something that could take an hour to do last year might be fixed with an AI plugin. Take 5 minutes now. It's
Um,
crazy.
yeah, and graphic design is like a baby
Yeah.
compared to other art forms. Like I don't even know if is it still like figuring out what it even is at this point, or it's becoming something entirely different. Um, it feels like it's mutating and like venturing off into like new territory, which is exciting, but it's also, I feel like it's really overwhelming for students, particularly, or people who are just getting into it to be like, okay, well, how do I do this? How do I, there's not like a clear cut roadmap on how to do it or like what to do, which can be exciting, but it can also be kind of like, I don't know, super
Yeah.
overwhelming.
I think graphic design is more like 5 different art practices in a trench coat. And it
Yeah.
feels like, because some people are really into typography and type design,
Yeah.
and some people hate it. And like, you can be equally as good at graphic design being one or the other. I like never used Photoshop at school, but Candace, who's another student who I interviewed, only used
Yeah.
Photoshop, right? So it's
Wow.
kind of nice that you can pick and choose the things that you're interested in. But you're right, it's sort of daunting to be, a teenager or 20 and you're like in this new field and you're like, there's no standard by which you can be good at it because there's no established norm of what's good other than, the professors who might have grown up in an era when there weren't even computers to do work on. I wonder
Yeah.
how you sort of um, calm students or like break them into the kind of overwhelmingness of graphic design. You just are starting a new position too, so that's super exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's complex. And I think that was a big thing I learned at CalArts was just like embracing complexity and trying to see like the beauty in it rather than letting it just like, I don't know, stop you in your tracks and
Yeah.
make you want to give up. But we need it and we need to like try to kind of understand it too. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Like your the multi-platform class terrified me, so I did not take it. But then like
Really?
yeah, because I was like, I don't I'm very bad at technology. I think I'm secretly an 80-year-old man in a costume because I like so much of the interest I have in graphic design or what brought me to design was painting and oil pastel drawing and illustration. And so my interests were always so far afield from like Maria and Wenshan, who were two of my closest friends in the program, who were like total techies. Like everything they made had to be 3D or video game inspired or like insanely technological. Which again, I think is great that like you have a diversity of people. But it can also feel overwhelming to people who are like afraid of technology.
Yeah.
But now I really wish I had taken your class because I feel like such an old person.
Still could. I don't know. Free
I'll
art
have
and
you give me a
design,
lecture.
visual
Yeah.
multi-platform.
Oh my God. But yeah, like maybe I'm curious how you like get students to be comfortable being outside their comfort zone.
Well, we're still working on it. It's week two. It's just, it takes time. It's a practice. Just like every time you open up Photoshop, you get more familiar with like where everything is, and you just develop a muscle memory. And um, yeah, I I think because you're talking to me at like the beginning of the semester, I'm like, oh, I got to see how it goes. But
But you also taught
um,
last year, and I think
no,
you
I
admitted
know,
that
I
at least.
know.
So
Yeah, I've been teaching for 5 years, but I think yeah, it's just, it takes time, it takes practice. And a big thing that I always talk about in my classes is like, we're here to fail gloriously. Like, you are not here to make the best work that you've ever made in your life. You're here to learn and make a bunch of stuff, and some things you're going to like and some things you're going to hate, and that's okay. But you're going to learn some things about yourself along the way. And um, yeah, and also like, I try to build a sense of community in the classroom too, because I think that's huge. I think that's like where 90 he agrees. Like 95% of the learning happens is like from your peers. It's not actually from your instructor. The instructor's really just there to like facilitate the environment and add some structure. Um, and it took some time to kind of like figure that out, that like, oh yeah, I'm not like some hard ass that's gonna like, nobody's gonna take that seriously if I'm like trying to be a jerk. So, and I've had students that are like the same age as me or older than me. So you have to, meet people where they're at too. And everybody comes to the space with like different things that they want to get out of it too, and different comfort levels, and just sort of like um, encouraging them to lean on each other and like, ask for help, ask lots and lots and lots of questions, and not be afraid to ask questions. That's all, I think, all you can do, you know.
well, I
Uh,
think art and design are really interesting in that something something more technological or straightforward, like a science class or a history class, you have one person who has like a ton of knowledge and they're imparting it on people who don't have that knowledge, and it's very linear, and you could get that experience from like a podcast or reading a book, or with science experiments you have to do them yourself, but like, and I'm simplifying, but art, because it's a creative endeavor, I feel like your job is partially to like teach people these skills and this knowledge and this like historical knowledge of this medium or this collection of mediums. But then it's also partially, like you said, it's like you're navigating people's egos and feelings and thoughts and like the emotional and like spirit, not spiritual, but like the creative part of design. And that's like striking that balance can often be kind of insane, which is part of the reason I wanted to have an alternative teaching forum like the project that we're doing. Um, but I was wondering if you had sort of thoughts on that. Like at CalArts, none of the classes, it seemed, other than electives, were, directly skill-based learning,
mhm.
teaching classes.
Yeah. And that's something I go back and forth a lot about, and a lot of it is like context and expectations. Um, because I've taught at, this is my fourth school that I've worked at. So I've worked at like a couple of all of them have been really different environments. and have very different student populations and different expectations as far as like what they need to get out of it, and also yeah, I guess my first job was at DePaul University, and I was actually teaching 3D modeling and animation. It was a Cinema 4D workshop class, so entirely skills based.
Yeah.
But I tried to infuse some more like speculative design, world building, critical aspects to it for those who like wanted to go there. And and then taught like a different class there in the history of title design, or it was a title design class, but we talked a lot about the history, titles for film and animation. So
Mm.
that was like a little bit more in the, um, you know, more critical, more discussion based. There was a little, very little actual like technical software
Yeah.
skills in, I think, After Effects and Photoshop, just to like type subtitles and then animate them. But yeah, and so I guess I was bringing that up to say that like that first group of students was animators. Like they want to animate, they want to go out, get jobs in animation, and they need to know those skills. The title design class was more like it was a lot of film editors, some film directing students, some graphic design students, but it was in the film school that they were taking it through. And then I went to Loyola, which was a BA program. Most of the students were not majoring in visual communication is what they call it. They're not graphic design. So I would have students who were majoring in psychology, a lot in like communication, marketing, and then minoring in graphic design. But a lot of them were like really well spoken, really great communicators, great writers. So they wanted to have like more of these in-depth conversations, but they also wanted like, to learn how to just do the basics of Photoshop. So yeah, and I remember that being a point of contention when I was at CalArts, and it came up, in the past year or two, just like, what do why don't we learn these things? And I I see both sides of it, and I see a lot of value in the model that the more critical theory based model, and the idea that like you're developing skills to take on more of like an art director position, or something of that nature, where you're not necessarily being told what to do, but you can kind of like, you've developed the skills to come up with the ideas yourself. You can work on a team. You can execute your ideas, and it's sort of like the expectation is that you learn some of those skills on your own or in other classes. Yeah, I don't know what I expected going into CalArts, like as far as that went, when I'm trying to think back to it.
It feels sort of like CalArts bills itself, at least the design department, as like the undergrad program is like really skill based. You can graduate, become a professional designer, and that's like your thing. But CalArts, because it has this experimental critical ethos, like you get that as an undergrad student. And then the
Yeah.
MFA students feels like a totally different program where it's like you don't learn skills unless you go take an elective for those skills specifically or learn them on your own. And then everything in the mandatory classes is theoretical, and like you said, geared towards allowing you to be self-sufficient as like an art director or someone who's a little bit more theoretical.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't know that there are many like graduate programs, at least in the country, that like would um, focus more on software and technical skills. Um, I guess the like one tricky thing is like the PMFA level
Yeah.
where you're going in and you don't have a background in graphic design. Um, that's when it's like, okay, well, where are we going to learn these skills? So some of it has to happen. And I think it ended up happening more like one-on-one because not everybody needed the same to develop the same skills, and everybody was kind of at a different place. And when you have a small cohort like that, you can do like one-on-one.
Yeah.
Um, I think, yeah, there's value in both. And I don't think there's like any perfect model out there that I know of yet. Um,
To be
inside
discovered.
inside of an institution that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of my interest in creating something like the Free Art and Design School, where like you have Khan Academy style YouTube videos that teach you the basics of how to do Photoshop. And then I wanted this to kind of be analogous to a more theoretical, historical, discussion based kind of loose, university, Socrates on the mountain talking to people,
I
everyone
love
listen up.
it.
But I don't know. It just seems so strange to me that you can have, I don't know, so many of the discussions we ended up having in the MFA program had almost nothing to do with form or content. You would have a poster and talk about it for an hour, and you wouldn't even be talking about what it looked like at a certain point, which might be a little bit navel-gazing, but it's interesting that you could have a place like that, like CalArts or another MFA class, that gets so philosophical and abstracted.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that happens elsewhere, and I think maybe it's because graphic design is such a like amorphous blob of a thing that like it just is gooey and seeps out into other areas, and all of a sudden you're talking about something that has nothing to do with the poster you stayed up all night working on, um, which could be frustrating, but yeah.
Sometimes, but sometimes fun too. I mean, my background's in philosophy. My undergrad and first master's degree were philosophy of science and philosophy of language. So often when I approached a project, I was thinking about those not nebulous, but more amorphous concepts. And so it was kind of refreshing to find that discussion again in a non-philosophical program. But you're right that like it's tricky when you're like, well, I did 3 years of talking gobbledygook. Can I please have a job somewhere? And then you're photoshopping stuff for someone, and then it never comes up again unless you're talking to design people.
Mhm. Yeah. And well, I don't know. I think education in this day and age is like a very different thing than it was 30 years ago, or, early days of CalArts more than 30 years ago. Um, where like the founding of CalArts, the ideas behind it, they just translate differently now, and the stakes are higher. It's more expensive to go to school, just cost of living is higher. So I think that there is more pressure for school to be this vocational
Yeah.
model where you're getting set up to get a job afterwards. I don't know if that was always so important. I mean, yeah.
Well, it's hard because art school is in some ways very different from any other kind of school. In some ways, not so much, but like when I was getting a philosophy degree, I knew people didn't hire philosophers anymore. And sort of
Mhm.
ironically, I went to art school as a way to build a career, which I don't advise to anyone. It's the weirdest way to like, enter the working world. But I mean, yeah, I read it's so interesting because I did a lot of research on Woman House in Judy, Chicago
Mhm.
before I got into CalArts because of an feminist art history class I'd taken in college. Um, and it seems like so much of CalArts originally was either animators who were, in the Disney pipeline who in some ways had like a very real job, like you were
Mhm.
talking about with your uncle, like a corporate art job. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you had fine artists who were, I don't know why they would have been at a school. It seems like you can learn any of those things outside of an institution, but then
Mhm.
made their way into the institution for whatever reason. And it seems today CalArts sells, and a lot of art schools sell themselves as like you're paying so much so that you can get a really high paying job elsewhere. And you're right that that and any other college are like so much harder to get into now because of that economic pressure. I don't know exactly how that translates into what gets taught in the classroom, because I don't think like you directly were told like, oh, you have to, make the ROI up to the students and like get them jobs. Like I never
Yeah.
felt like those conversations
No.
happened at all.
No, 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 no. And I haven't really experienced that pressure hasn't existed elsewhere either. Um, but oh, sorry. Yeah. Um, I don't know. It's just something I think about. It's like, uh, what's the balance, I guess, between those technical software skills and the conceptual critical thinking. I think they're both important, but one you can put on a resume and the other you just have to like be able to speak for yourself, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good time to ask you a question. So you uniquely sort of have this like wonderful software skill like bucket and like this wonderful critical thinking skill bucket. I feel like professors sometimes are more one than the other, but you come from both of these perspectives. I'm sort of curious, like, other than literally teaching students the skills and the things that you want to talk about, like, what are your main goals for teaching a class? Like, irrespective of the particular class you're teaching, like, what are your more sort of philosophical goals coming
Mm.
into it?
I would hope that each student um, is able to get what they want to get out of it, because that's different for everybody. I would hope that I am able to show them resources, artists, designers, inspiration for things that they've never heard of, and avenues to find other things that they've never heard of. I It's cheesy, but I'm like, I want to be a mirror to reflect back and like just help coach and guide them to achieve the things that they want to achieve. Um, it's a little different on the undergraduate versus the graduate level in terms of like, grads like know what they want to get out of the class, but undergrads, they're kind of just like, I need you to tell me.
Yeah.
But I guess another goal is just to like get them comfortable talking about work, developing a vocabulary, like kind of finding their own voice in the classroom. Um, yeah, and just learning to kind of like express themselves, develop some design skills that they may use for a job or they may not. They may just like use it in their own personal life. I think there's a lot of design skills that are like actually really good just for navigating life. And yeah, I hope to like just impart some of that, I guess.
That's really beautiful. And also it's sort of different from how I imagine people framing being a teacher 30 years ago. Although maybe not. I think you have always had people like you or Karita Kent who are like interested in the more personal or spiritual development of art in the art classroom. You were talking about having personal life skills. I was wondering if you could talk about being a musician and doing all of your own art and like band posters and album covers. And like you certainly have employed your design skills in all these other facets of your life and your friends' lives.
Yeah, well, when I was talking about like design skills, even just like I I keep like I have boxes and boxes of sketchbooks and notebooks, and I've started this new practice of like keeping a notebook that I track all of my goals in, and I'll just, write random things and draw and collage in it. But I'll have like, okay, I've got my fall goals, and this is going to be
Mm.
my fall goals notebook. And I feel like it's my designer brain trying to like organize my thoughts and help me just like not get so freaked out about all the things that I need to do. And yeah, I guess my design skills are an extension, a part of my sound practice. They're sort of like one in the same. I played in a couple of bands, and so, you know, do posters or like little videos or cover art or things. But I've actually been thinking about like outsourcing or like asking for help for things, which I'm like, oh,
They're so good.
I I just
You
I'm like, oh,
can't. No, you're not allowed.
but I'm like, I don't know. It could be interesting to like bring in somebody else and see how they like interpret things. I mean, I'm a very collaborative worker. I kind of like need collaborators in most of the things that I'm working on, to just like keep me inspired and energized and engaged. Um, but yeah, I guess a couple years ago, over 3 years ago, like early pandemic days, I had a friend post something on Instagram that he was like trying to set up free food community refrigerators in Chicago. And he had been in New York and seen, a movement like taking place there and in Los Angeles. And so I started making like little graphics and flyers to try and get people to host these free food refrigerators around the city. And then before we knew it, there were like 35 refrigerators, and now it's gone down to like 20. But it's been 3 years, and we didn't think that these things would like make it in sub-zero temperatures here. Um, but that's been a way, and it's all like mutual aid, volunteer based. Um, I'm doing design work, but I'm also like going and picking up food and taking it to refrigerators, or like going and cleaning out a refrigerator that has like a disaster in it. So it's not all design work. And I think that's, it kind of I have to have like the experience of like being in community with my neighbors and talking to them and seeing what people need, what they're going through, and just what that is like. But that's been another, I guess, very unexpected but big part of my practice. And through that, I met my friend Eric Von Haynes, who runs Flatlands Press,
Mhm.
and we've become like really great friends and collaborators. And he's a designer
Mhm.
and has a risograph press, and is actually how I ended up teaching at UIC because he teaches there.
Ah,
So I'm excited to be back working with him too, and kind of seeing what possibilities open up with that, and just kind of like digging back into community-based design, which I was trying to do in Los Angeles. And it's very possible, you can do it anywhere. I think I feel a little bit more agency here, just like having these roots and connections already. But yeah, that's another way that like design works its way in my life and has been useful, I guess. And um, yeah.
Works for me. Yeah, I think the communal aspect is something that isn't highlighted enough in educational programs. It's like you said, how important community and learning from the people around you is. Like, I'm so lucky to have met so many amazing designers, either through CalArts like you, or like my cohort, or just, I'll be printing randomly at some shop and then I'll meet 3 people, and then, they're doing their thing. They invite me to a show. Just these happenstance connections that really make it feel worthwhile and fulfilling to be an artist and designer. I really appreciate you talking about all of these things. I think you have a lot of great perspectives, and I could have asked you 100 other questions.
I could
Um,
have asked you a bunch of questions too.
you can interview me for another one of these.
Yeah, let's
Is
do
that is
it.
that Ziggy? That's my last question.
Yeah, that's
Can
Ziggy.
Ziggy say hi?
She's
Ziggy,
here.
why are
Yeah.
you no longer in LA?
Oh, she'll come back
She's
sometime.
gotta. She was like most of my serotonin at CalArts when I'd see her.
She's a great therapy dog.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
she'll be back. She'll be back.
She better. I'm wondering if you have the last couple minutes, any parting comments or words of wisdom for younger folks hoping to make it work.
Try not to take yourself so seriously. Try not to take criticism personally. And I think those go hand in hand. And I'm talking not just to young folks, but I'm talking to myself here.
Mm,
Because it's just like a constant reminder. And I think, yeah, just like I would just underscore the communal connection aspect, like doing things like this, I think is so important. I think your project is amazing, and I'm excited to see, where that continues to go. Oh, I did want to say too, I listened to Candace's interview, and when she talked about her origin story, oh, that's what I was going to bring up. Shoot.
next
Um,
time.
I also was really into Microsoft Greetings and making cards, and I've never heard somebody else chart that as like a graphic design origin story, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so seen.